mask. I'm just wondering, is that all going to be explained to a student when they have to wear the mask and when they don't have to wear the mask if they decide they don't want to wear the mask?
Thank you for your questions. Yes, so the first question, once you are entering any of our buildings that has a universal masking mandate, even if you are a student in a school and that day or that week, that has parent choice, you must wear a mask. Certainly, we want to make sure that we are going to spend an inordinate amount of time providing any updates. Should the board approve these updates and revisions, we will spend an inordinate amount of time communicating the changes to all of our teachers and staff, our students, and certainly continue to make sure that we are very clear about communications to our parents and community members.
Okay, you also had mentioned that March 1st and your hope that maybe this would bring some of those that are virtual back to school if masks are lifted. Is it still going to be that you cannot leave cyber until it's a clean break? So that would be the end of March, would be the end of the third quarter.
We have not made that
lift that if you lift masks.
We have not made that decision. It's under consideration and will likely be discussed at our work session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sitter. Do we have any others?
We do. We have a few others. Troy Prozan is next. Mr. Prozan?
Hey, good evening. How are you?
We can barely hear you, sir.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. This is in regards to the health and safety plan. I have a question about masking. Where's the directive coming from as far as masking? Has it always been just the superintendent making a recommendation, or is it the solicitor stating that it's law? And if it's law, if he could let us all know where in the public school code it actually defines it is okay to mask children, because I've went through the entire school code and I don't see that verbiage in there anywhere. So can you please let everyone know where the directive's coming from as far as masking?
Originally, the directive was from the governor and the Pennsylvania Department of Health, and that was in place, and we had to follow that in accordance with the law up until the time that the Supreme Court rendered the decision that that order by the Pennsylvania Department of Health, Secretary of Health, was inappropriate and not in accordance with the rulemaking rules that she is required to follow. Once the Supreme Court made that determination, it was no longer a mandate by law in accordance with the Pennsylvania Secretary of Health. Subsequent to that, then it's based on the school board's power under the school code. And there's various sections of the school code and the Department of Education regulations and the Department of Health regulations that we would rely on for the determination that the school board does have the power to require masks going into school for the protection of the health and safety of its students.
Where is that language though? Where does it say that they have the power to mask children?
It doesn't.
You're tiptoeing around the question. Where in the school code does it say that children can be masked by school boards?
There's various sections, as I said, in the school code that allow.
Where does it say it? Where does it say it? Where does it say that school boards can mask children?
It doesn't.
You're not answering the question.
When you're done asking the question, I'll answer the question.
You can't answer the question because it's not
I can't answer the question. It is
right.
There are various sections of the school code that allow the school board to establish rules and regulations in regard to the health and safety of its students. One of those decisions can be that they can require masking.
So it states in there that
the
they
answer
can
to
require
your
masking.
question.
So it states in there that they can require masking. That's the exact wording in there?
No, that exact wording that you're saying is not exactly in the school code, no.
Okay, so what is the exact wording then?
It's in the school code.
But where? Where? I'm
501
asking you where it
to
is so
11,
people know where to look.
various sections. I can provide you an entire list of regulations and sections of school.
You don't have to provide it with me because I have my own, I
You
have my
already
own.
have it. I
attorney.
know you
It's
have
not
it.
in
I
there.
already gave it to you originally.
It's not in there.
Well, that's your opinion.
No, it's not my opinion. It's a matter of fact. You can't answer the question because it's not in there.
Mr. President, do you have any other questions?
Yes, where in the school code does it say that school board directors can mask children?
I've already answered that question.
But you didn't answer the question.
Okay, Ms.
So-
Prozan, obviously it's a difference of opinion. Attorney Senate said he provided it. You said it's not there.
Okay, so
ask
we're
and answer.
masking the kids based on opinion? Then?
No, we're masking it based on the sections of the Pennsylvania School Code and the sections of the Department of Education regulations, which I've already provided.
Okay.
Okay, the next person we have is Jan Olms. Are you there, Jan? You will probably have to unmute yourself. You can go ahead and speak. You have a question?
Okay,
Maybe we can circle back and,
well, she was the
Try
last
Jan.
one that had her hand raised, unless there's some others here.
Jan, are you able to hear us?
Last call, Jan?
Okay, item 6.01.
I'd just like, before you move on to the adjournment, I'd just like to say, 2 weeks, March 1st is 2 weeks from tomorrow. And, I hope that everyone gives us some grace that, where we're at right now, there's still a lot. We're having a public meeting at some point between now and then. I know many of you are passionate about removing the mask, but there's just as many parents passionate about keeping them. We need them to have an opportunity to also during the public meeting too, because their children may be at risk or they feel. So it's 2 weeks. It's been 2 years, I understand, but we just asked for 2 weeks. So we can have the public hearing, so we can have a good dialogue to move forward with the recommendation. As you heard, many questions are still. Ms. Matter had some great questions about, going between the two buildings. There's questions out there we don't even know that exist right now. So I think we would be irrational to today, let's pass it tonight, without so many unknowns out there. So I just want to say that be gracious with us. Other school districts are still filtering through this the same way, trying to figure it out. And I know Dr. Roberts will be talking to many of them over the next week or two to get their input of how they're addressing some of these questions as well. So, Ms. Winchell, thank you.
Thank you, well said. Item 6.01, I'd like to move for adjournment. May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next committee meeting is Finance and Operations. Mr. Linder.
Thank you, President Winchell. Ms. Sitter, if we can start with the roll call this evening?
Okay, Mr. Lindner,
Here.
Mr. Winchell,
Here.
Mr. Kabilka.
Here.
Okay. Item 1.02, approval of agenda. I'd like to bring the agenda forward. Can I have a second?
Second, Kabilka.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, I think there's a deletion and under,
Oh, no, we're in Finance Operations.
I'm sorry, the wrong thing. Go ahead.
It's in the wrong committee.
Okay, thank you.
Never
I
mind.
was going to be surprised. It's like Aaron pulled one on tonight.
Pass me.
Okay. Seeing there's no discussion, all those in favor?
No problem.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 2.01, meeting minutes of January 10th, 2022. I'd like to bring those forward for approval. I have a second.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. This evening, we have 13 action items. 12 of those action items will be discussed to be brought forward to the 28th school board meeting. One of those action items, and I'm going to take that one first, is to be brought forth to the committee of the whole meeting following the meeting this evening. I know Ms. Winchell's committee was long. I apologize. I might outpace you tonight with ours as well. So those of you in the room, I appreciate that you stay and have your say towards the end. The first item I'd like to bring up is item 3.12, the Mcdowell Auditorium Study. And that is to discuss, Mr. Gallagher, would you like to touch base on that first, and then we can discuss that one?
Yes, thank you. So at the last meeting, we had the presentation from Clark Patterson Lee on the Mcdowell study for the auditorium and some of those other spaces. I'm asking tonight to move forward with that, with all of the items that we discussed last time. That was a total estimated cost of $9,400,000. I will note that that will include a fee for additional design services. With that, does anybody have any questions on that study?
Just quickly review them again.
Yes, I can do that. So, sort of a quick overview of what we're proposing. So the auditorium, we would change that into educational space, a couple of extra classrooms, innovation, STEM lab, maker space, and some large group instruction. Then we would propose to renovate the library, change the cafe portion of it to make it a little larger, and upgrade the library to have some breakout spaces. And then consolidate and upgrade the technology wing. I guess all of the wood shop and all that would get relocated to the high school and all get renovated. And then renovate the autistic support and life skills in the back of the auditorium. They currently have a space that's inadequate, so we would increase the size of those and renovate those spaces. And then down at Mcdowell Intermediate, where we pulled some of the tech ed out of there and moved it up to the high school, we would centralize all of home economics and child development. Any other questions on that?
Does that displace any other, when you moved the home ec, was there something involved there with music room?
Yes, but we found a location for that. So the keyboard room actually becomes the child development room. But there will be another classroom that'll be right there that they'll get relocated to. And then we will actually gain 2 classrooms on the second floor for additional educational space.
The music department is okay with where that location is?
Yes, and that's where we can still work through some of that stuff. This is kind of the big concept ideas. So I am confident we will be able to make something that works for them on that lower level to keep all the music department together.
Thank you.
Yep.
So before we get too far down the discussion, because I think there's going to be a little bit more here, I'd like to bring this item forward as a motion to discuss, bring it forward to the committee of the whole meeting following the meetings this evening. And I have a second for that.
A second.
Okay, now into formal discussion. Sorry, Mr. Gallagher, thank you for staying. I know I asked the question, I know Ms. Lupacek asked the same question. How many students are moving per block as a result of this change in programming between the 2 buildings?
Yes, so John Kavanaugh, I appreciate he took the time to talk to both of the admin teams, and they're estimating about 90 additional students per block will be traveling between the 2 schools.
And maybe you know this answer, but maybe Dr. Kavanaugh can help us. What is the total number of students now moving for those of us who, it's 90 more than what? So what is the base number that's already moving per block?
I'm not sure if he determined that. I will tell you, he did say that both teams were not worried from a actual being able to get the kids from point A to point B with the allotted amount of time. Obviously, the safety was kind of the reason you were bringing it up. But I do not know the quantity now of students that move.
So that would be my questions. How many students total are going to be outside of the buildings in the class period changes? And what type of risk assessment has the district done? And what level of risk are we willing to accept? Or does that walkway finally have to be addressed because of this additional risk that we're now instituting into this change? I think I don't have a question or a concern about the project. I think the project is valid. I think that the question is, what is the level of risk the board and the district are accepting, and how are we mitigating that risk with the students to accommodate this change?
So I will add, and I know you know this, Clark Patterson Lee did take a look at that walkway to see what we could do with it. They had a little bit of a, I didn't actually share this study yet because they're still completing it. It's in draft form. They'll complete it when they complete the Gus Anderson Field study portion. They looked into all of the requirements for putting a raised walkway between the two schools. The biggest thing is you got to maintain the fire lanes around both buildings. So they looked at doing a raised one. They're estimating it would be a couple $1 million in order to make that happen. And then we would have to get through quite a few, BIU review and all that kind of stuff. So it would be a difficult task. They came up with a few other ideas, putting up additional fencing, and they'll provide more details on that when they provide us the Gus Anderson Field study. I just wanted to give you that information. But you're right, that is the question.
So that's the big, for me, that's the big concern. I'm not worried about the cost of this program. While it is significant, I see the value and what it brings to the two schools. I just want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a position where we have greater liability and we are trying to incorporate this walkway in at a later date. I would rather see if this is something that the district feels needs to be mitigated, that we explore all the options of how to fix this deficiency that has been out there for a while or has been concerned by the district for many years.
Yeah.
Just because I did hear the question about how many go between each block. That's unfortunately very difficult to say from year to year because it's based on the courses and the course selections there. My estimation is a couple hundred going from one building to another at each time. So you're probably talking 300 to 400 at a time going back and forth already. So add 90 more onto that.
So if we're moving 400 students per block, we're moving almost a fifth of the student population every period.
Not every period, no. Depends on what the courses are that are offered at that particular time. There's certain blocks that have more classes that kids come down to. Like when all the music classes are down at MIHS, every kid who wants music from high school is all coming down. Everybody for Lifetime Fitness is all coming down. So there are certain blocks where it's busier. There's other ones that might only be closer to 200. It depends year to year, class to class, what the offerings are and how many students choose those courses.
You're saying we could potentially flex between 10% and 20% of the student population traveling depending on the block.
I would say about 10%, yes, is a pretty safe number. And again, that's an estimate. I don't have exact, I mean, if you want to give me a little bit of time, I could go give you every kid that travels every block this year and report back to you at the next board meeting if you think that is necessary.
That is my question to my colleagues on the board and to Dr. Roberts. What level are we willing to say that we need to address the walkway at in order to do this project? Maybe I'm pushing an agenda that nobody else feels is appropriate. And that's my question to my colleagues when we vote on this at the committee of the whole. What does that walkway factor into the decision of making this project happen?
Well, I guess my question is, when were you coming back to us with a Gus Anderson proposal, and why is the walkway part of Gus instead of part of this?
So the walkway got added a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about it. There was no, I wasn't given direction to look into it before. And then the biggest reason why we're coming with this now is I need to move on this in order to keep our timelines with trying to get the high school started in 2023 with the funding and everything else that needs to be done. And I don't want to rush through, we got to get input from the teachers and everybody to make sure we make the right decision on how we spend the money. Does that answer your question?
What's the timing on Gus?
They told me by the end of March. And then I will try to get that turned, whatever we decide, I will try to get the walkway turned around quickly. Now, Gus Anderson gets into another whole thing because the study's going to say how much and how far we want to go with that. So that would be, the only concern is depending on what they come up with, whether we have the funding in place to actually do Gus Anderson.
Now you're referring to the, excuse me, the walkway being raised, correct? Because you talked about the fire lane, so you probably need like a 14 or 15 foot clearance at least on the Mcdowell side. So that means it would terminate on the second floor at Mcdowell, more than likely?
That would be the difficult part, yep. And then the stairwells aren't code compliant, and they'd all have to be ADA compliant. And then you go down the line, and then you would want to raise it, I assume at McDowell Intermediate, and try to hit that higher as well. Because you want to enclose it all the way from one building to the other.
I'm kind of assuming the natural grade at the intermediate side might play
Might, but
into it,
that's a
that
good
it wouldn't
point.
have to be as high.
Yeah,
But if you go underground, then you've got ventilation issues and such, right? I mean, if we considered doing an underground,
yeah, I think
that would be probably
pretty-
much more
pretty-
expensive than the overhead.
I think so,
So, Mr.
yeah.
Kadoka, one of the other challenges we have is not necessarily Mcdowell so much. It's MIHS, because MIHS is ringed by the service lane for cars. So we have to cross a road there. At McDowell, we're not technically, we could find a way to not block a fire lane because the
Yeah.
fire lane comes from both directions into the back of that building. But MIHS, we would have to cut apart the existing transportation pathway. But I know Mr. Gallagher and I have talked, there's also no statement that it has to be in the spot that it is. There's other ways to get from A to B.
Yes, yes. We talked about moving the walkway to the backside, just so it's not out in the open. And then at that point, it would be a further distance. I know Mike looked at the numbers there. So there's some other options. They're all, yeah, gonna be difficult. The one thing, like I said, they came back with was they recommended, they've seen this at other schools, is putting another fence in, 8 feet off the walkway. And wouldn't look that great, but if safety is the most important thing, then you make sure vehicles can't get through, and you kind of start putting the fences up.
I know we have one area where the ambulance gets into the McDowell or into the Gus Anderson field, but that could be
That would be another
do
one.
something different or something like that.
Yeah, and that would be tough because now where do you come in on the other side with the bleachers the way they are and the hill on the backside of the visitors bleachers? So yes, then that's another issue you'd have to get through.
I mean, I think it's legitimate because, you really are going to have one campus with the two buildings, It makes it most sense to be able to utilize both buildings for the majority of stuff, but, we do have to consider that. I know they have one at Edinburgh, that's probably relatively long. I want to say it's, probably better than 1,000 feet or something. It's a pretty big one, but I'm sure it's not cheap.
Perspective, it's about 600 and roughly 20 feet from MIHS to McDowell on the current path. If you were to go behind the building, it extends out to about 800 feet. If you were going on the backside of Gus Anderson. So it's no small ask. That's why I'm bringing this up, and I just want to make sure that that's part of this conversation. We've heard it from parents that have called in on this subject matter, and it's been something that's been asked of Finance and Operations Committee for many years. So I just want to make sure it's part of this conversation because we're going to kind of exasperate the existing condition. No other discussion. I will, all those in favor of moving this item forward to the committee of whole meeting this evening, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher and Dr. Kavanaugh. Mr. O'Toole, if you'd like to start to take us through the annual comprehensive financial report and
I think because we have so many people concerning the baseball, maybe we should come to that, or just hate to keep our students here for so long. Feasibility study.
We could do that presentation. Chris Coughlin's waiting out in the hall to do that presentation right now.
Sorry.
If you want to move that forward.
as long as that's okay, we jump to section 4. We do that informational item so that we allow the professional and the students that are all here in the audience to have a thing and to see that. And then would it be acceptable if we took the public comment on the baseball field at that time so our students can get back to studying this evening?
Sure. The one thing I would like to mention is that we did bring this as informational, but at the end of the month, we would need some direction from the board on, or at least a committee of what location they would ideally like to see out of this study.
With that being said, then if we can, everyone's in agreement, let's move to item 4.03. Let's review the baseball and softball field study this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Fielker, are you in agreement with that?
I am in
Thank you.
consensus, yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for bringing me up early. I really appreciate it. I have 15 copies of the report here. If I could pass these out each way. There. You need a few more?
Oh, but just one more, I guess.
Well, good evening, everyone. We're here to talk about the baseball and softball study. There we go. We have three potential scenarios. First one, for baseball and softball, turfing the infield and the outfield both. Second option would be the turf the infield only. So that would mean that the outfield would then be grass. And then the last option would be for all natural grass. Now, before I get into some of these numbers, one thing I'd like to share with you to give you some idea, the turf for baseball typically is about 1.2 million. That's just the turf itself. That doesn't include any bleachers or anything else. So it just gives you some idea. Softball is approximately $450,000 to $500,000 because it's dramatically smaller than your typical baseball field. The three sites we're looking at are the Millcreek Learning Center, the old Asbury School, Walnut Creek Middle School, where the existing baseball fields are now, and then the Hamlin Complex. Millcreek Learning Center has absolutely zero infiltration. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with it. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember. Gary, you're shaking your head. You remember too. Back when MIHS was built, a lot of the construction materials and debris went to this site right behind the school. Over the years, it was filled, it was leveled out in order to create baseball fields and a play area. But unfortunately, that soil does not infiltrate at all. So what that means to us, more money in stormwater management, because we're gonna have to figure out a way in order to get that water into the soil. There's a lot of clay, there's a lot of fill material. The other thing about this site is that we require infrastructure upgrades in order to bring electrical, plumbing, et cetera, into that site, because all that's there now is what is existing for the existing Asbury School. We would consider the Learning Center the least desirable site of the three. The estimated cost is somewhere between 3 and 3.6 million. If you're familiar with the site at all, this being north is to the top of the page, we'd be able to get both a baseball and softball field on there, but they're both relatively tight. You can see how they fit with each other. Now, as far as irrigation is concerned, this would need to be a rain garden. If any of you are familiar with any of the rain gardens we have in Millcreek Township, we have a lot of plants growing. You let water in there and you let the water infiltrate into the soil. So it just wouldn't be a deep pit. It would actually have plants in it. This site as well is very, very tight for 2 fields, and then parking is also limited. Walnut Creek Middle School. Unfortunately, I remember this quite well. I remember when Walnut Creek Middle School was being built. That soil is fantastic. It's very gravelly. It was farmland at one time. It has excellent infiltration. The water goes right through it for about 2 feet. It's probably the best soil in Erie County. You have existing infrastructure there. There's baseball fields there now. There's concession stand. You have electric. You have plumbing. So this makes a better site than it would over at the Learning Center. This site also offers you quite a few options. You could have a multi-use field there. In the lower left corner, you can see it's a combination baseball, softball, soccer, lacrosse. You could have a variety of them. You could also turf the existing fields are there. You have 2 softball fields, a full baseball field, and 2 smaller baseball fields. Cost for this site, somewhere between 3 and 3.3 million. The stormwater management difference between this site and the old Asbury School or Millcreek Learning Center site is approximately $100,000 to $200,000. The next site we looked at was the handling complex. We have average infiltration here. If anybody's familiar with that site at all, you know how the water runs to the bottom, creating almost a channel effect there. This has been previously tested by the DEP. We do have some infrastructure there. There's electric there, there's concessions there, there's plumbing there. We would consider this an ideal site, and being a realtor, just because of location and its proximity to the high school, makes a ton of sense. It's right next door. You already have parking, and that parking is for that complex only, so we don't have to create more parking like we would at the other schools. This site would actually require channel protection, and what that means, if you think about how that site slopes, we're actually creating channel with the way the water runoff would be, so we have to somehow stop that water. Stormwater management for this is about the same as it would be for Walnut Creek. There's not much of a difference, which both of those still would be $100,000 to $200,000 less than the Millcreek Learning Center. Now at this site, we do have to protect the neighbors that are down below, and it'll be a 1-year, 24-hour storm. We have to worry about the degradation and erosion of what's going on in that neighborhood behind us, which I know Sanford has already figured out for us it can be done. Now, if you look at any of the numbers that are in your book, we started around $3 million. If you were to strip away a lot of the niceties or lighting or bleachers or some of those things, we can almost reduce it by $1 million, bringing it to about $2 million. With this number on all of these around 3 million, we have dugouts, a press box, bleachers for 50, a concession stand, restrooms, fencing, a grooming device, lighting all the way around both fields, and stormwater management. Now, one thing before I get into alternates and possible changes we could make, all of these fields include a rubber pad. I do not recommend doing a field without a rubber pad underneath it, and they also include rubber as the infill, as opposed to being wood, which I'll share with you in a minute. For deducts, in order to go to sod, it's approximately $90,000 to $120,000. Now, one of the things I can tell you with the problem with sod is we have to wait for the grass to grow. So if you do artificial turf, the minute it's finished, you can start playing on it. If we do turf, depending upon the timing, we might not be able to play on that field for an entire year after it's complete, just so you know, because we have to let that grass grow, and it's all about timing. To just do the turf out or turf the infield and leave the grasses outfield is a savings of approximately $95,000. Excuse me. And for baseball, to just turf the infield would be a savings of $140,000. Now, one of the interesting things we came up in doing during our study, if everybody's familiar with the rubber that's in the artificial turf, you see it flying everywhere, it gets on everybody's clothes. The other thing that really bothers me about the rubber is the heat. If you've ever seen that during a summer day and you can see the heat coming off it can be 30 to 40 degrees hotter than the temperature outside. They have a product that is made of wood fiber, and it's about $10,000 to $15,000 more, but it reduces the heat on that field by 30 to 40 degrees, which to me during the day is huge. We don't worry about it as much as football. Football's played at night, but with baseball, that's big. The other thing with the wood fiber is it doesn't have to be groomed as much, and the ball bounces better on a wood fiber surface as opposed to the rubber. I know baseball really, really likes it, so we want to bring that to your attention. I don't know if anybody wants to see it, touch it. Now, one of the fields we were looking at was a multi-purpose field, which you can see on the left in the photo, which has baseball, softball, lacrosse, soccer. That would be an option for Walnut Creek, just because of the area we have. The ad for that would be somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000. The reason for that is now everything has to become portable. You have portable fencing, and then you'd have to dismantle and re-erect things as it goes on. So that's where a lot of the costs come from. Last two options For baseball only, now these costs are a little bit more than what you would see total because we'd be setting up at two different sites. Baseball only at Walnut Creek will be somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 million. For softball only at Hanlon, 1,750,000 to 1,825,000. There are a few of these multi-purpose fields around. I know Gannon has one. The one that's shown here is actually in Depew, New York, and it's pretty impressive. It's been around for about 15 years. And with that, any questions?
I have a couple.
Yes.
First of all, when about 2018, 2019, some of this, I think there were some permits issued.
Yes.
Are any of those permits still any good? We have to go back and get them.
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Stormwater management has changed in Millcreek. Hasn't changed a whole lot, but enough that we have to resubmit it.
Okay, my next question has to do with safety. I know you talked about the sod or half turf. One of the problems with the field, my understanding is there are a lot of divots out there. So seems like the turf would make it safer for our students to play out in the field
If it's go away.
and the divots go away. You brought up, the wood chips. That sounds great, but this is Erie. I mean, I know it gets hot, but we're not melting usually. My next question is, in all the extras for the field, is there a walkway for wheelchair access? I know where it's set, there were problems for people getting down before.
Yes.
That's something we'll remedy.
Yes, every one of these scenarios has a contingency in there for handicap accessibility in order to get a handicap parking space as well as handicap access to the field, to the
Okay.
bleachers.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, last question. And this is for the Walnut Creek field. We have the MYA contract. Maybe Attorney Senate can talk to that. How would this impact that? Do they have a right of first refusal? How are we going to work that?
Based on the agreement and the designated areas where you're proposing the multi-field field, I guess, is not within those areas.
Okay.
I believe.
All right.
So unless you chose to redo one of those fields, we picked one outside of that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Chris, on the wood fill, what's the durability of that? Like Janine was saying, it's damp, it's wet, it's cold here versus the rubber as far as replacement, life expectancy.
You do have to fill it from time to time, but from what I understand, it lasts just as long as the rubber. Well, I'd like to really see the field. There's a couple of them around
Yeah.
here. There's one in Ashtabula. I'd also like to talk to the coaches about it. I haven't used it. I don't like being a guinea pig. I'm very familiar with the rubber. But the wood makes a lot of sense. And I will tell you that 30 to 40 degrees is huge. Where I first witnessed it was out at Gerald McLean when we did their turf field. And we were doing the track and the turf. And I remember one of the guys grabbing a piece of turf and he walked over to the track, which is black, threw it on the ground, and he was going to assemble a soccer goal. He burned his knees on that rubber because it was so hot. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how much heat comes off of that rubber. So if we could save 30 to 40 degrees with that, that's enormous during the day for these kids playing on
Another
that field.
question then, this compared to the turf. With grass, we have to wait until the grass grows, dries out, all of that. Turf, you can play on it. We also extend our season. You can start playing earlier as soon as we can, I guess, see the field. What about this?
Same thing.
Okay.
You'll be able to play on it all the time.
So it will extend extend our playing season that's shortened right now because.
We actually have a full turf softball field in Corey. They use it for gym class in the winter, when we don't have 4 feet of snow on it, which was this year for a couple weeks.
Chris, at the Hanlon complex, not the Hanlon, but where the baseball field is now. You talk about the drainage, but there's always been a problem with that. I mean, back in the 15 years ago, we put $100,000 into that side hill to stop it. Well, we had it fixed, didn't fix it. So what's Lay's confidence that they've got to figure it out now?
Well, we know you have a water vein that's about 15 feet underneath the middle of that parking lot up top too. I know Sanford, he does this all the time. He does it every day. He feels very confident he's going to be able to resolve it. I mean, we don't have much of a choice with stormwater. You have to.
Correct.
So I mean, when they come back and test it, we have to resolve it. But I have full confidence that Michael, design assistant, will resolve it.
With minimal impact with the neighbors below?
Correct. Well, the beauty of that is the fact that that's where all of it stops, right at the bottom. There's almost a natural stop for that down there at the bottom. And that's where that stormwater would be.
Is there an issue with the lighting with the neighbors down there too?
There
I know
would
at
be.
Asbury, there's
We
always
have to
an
make sure that we're not polluting the neighbors down there because that would be an awful lot of light down there. But they can direct those appropriately.
I have a question about the lighting at Hanlon. This bid only, or this estimate, I'm sorry, only includes lighting for the baseball and softball fields, not for the existing field that's there.
That's correct.
Okay.
What's the life expectancy of a turf field?
I wish you could see my smile right now because of actually, I was out at Joe McLean the other day, who's on 15 years of theirs. Traditionally, we see 10 to 12. No offense, one of the toughest things on these fields are the bands. The bands going back and forth in lines and repetition. So if you have a lot of band practices or you hold a lot of band events, those are typically the fields you see in 10 years that are done.
In terms of the hybrid fields, my understanding that the hybrid field is nice from a cost perspective, but maybe some of these baseball players can answer this. But you run into problems where you can't wear the same cleats in the outfield on the grass that you're wearing on the turf.
That's true. Because you're transitioning from natural grass to turf, there's a difference. And there's also that transition between the two as well. But it is a cost savings.
What is the field that UPMC has, the old Jerry Ut downtown?
I think they're grass still.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
grass, yeah. Most major leagues are grass.
And you guys have played at the Jerry Ut Park, but I'm
UPMC.
sure that that doesn't have problems with divots and such because it's maintained, right?
Double
So
A.
I mean, if we did a whole new base and we went with turf versus, or not turf, we went with natural grass, whatever you call it, but we completely put a base down and such, isn't that a good option? Because I get the part that it's all ratty and such, and that's not good. But if you did completely redo the base and then put sod on top of it, would that be a good option?
It's an okay option. I would say it's an adequate option. If your district wasn't playing on it all the time and needed it all the time, and in spring when it's so bad and our weather's so wet, that's what we see the major problem is. You mentioned it right there, is trying to get on that field in March, April, or May, and it's still wet, or we still have snow on it. That's the major advantage to these turf fields. And then plus repair, you're not having to go out and repair and take care of it. You are right, it's a less expensive option. It is another option. It just doesn't offer you the playability that the artificial turf would.
And do you have to run that big canvas or the cover on it when it rains? I always see them do that. That's
No, but you would have to run the groomer on it. Just like on the football field, you have to run the groomer and groom the rubber in order to bring it back up. You have to do that on a regular basis with the rubber. You don't have to do that with the wood fiber.
And if we were to just do a baseball field, that would be big enough that you could play softball on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
If you're going to have one or the other, I see an option to just have a softball field. That makes no sense. It's small. If you had the baseball field, then you could do softball and just have closer markers or whatever. I
You
guess,
could.
right?
You'd have to have it removable.
Thank you.
Chris, any concern about the two site locations, say the eliminating Millcreek Learning Center, but between the Walnut Creek and the current site as far as security, safety, seeing that the current field's kind of tucked back in and obviously spend $3 million versus like Walnut Creek, it might be a little bit more open and exposed.
You are right. Walnut Creek is definitely more open and more exposed. When we were looking at it, we looked at location as being one of the biggest things just because of the high school. But you're right. You get down in the bottom, it is way down in there. Now, one of the things I will say, the fact that it has its own parking, it's its own site. That's one of the things like the code's not going to look at us with Walnut Creek Middle School and Asbury. Are we going to have a function there that we'd also have a baseball game at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Coughlin, just
Yes.
real quick, I know we talked about the Hanlon complex. There is nothing in code that would make us have to replace the dugout, restrooms, concessions, or technically add lighting to Hanlon. So we theoretically can save the existing structure and we can just go ahead and do the drainage, do the turf, bring that field and make that playable. And that shaves roughly $1.3 million off that number.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the advantages of that Hanlon site. Some of that infrastructure is already built in that we wouldn't have to go and
Yeah.
redo. And I
guess
will
that-
tell you, a lot of cost comes in the dugouts, comes in the concessions, comes in the press box, depending upon how far you go.
There's no concern with the existing infrastructure at Hanlon Baseball complex. It's all in good order.
Yes. Yeah, not like I was worried about Walnut or the Learning Center. Any other questions, comments?
Yes, President Winchell, if that would be acceptable, I'd like to take us, section 5 for public comment, let our athletes maybe, or anybody in the public that might want to make a comment on this presentation.
Sure.
While the professionals here that could help us answer some of those.
Sure.
So-
Any questions from the public concerning the baseball presentation? Yeah, just state your name, please, and direct your question to the board and to Mr. Coughlin.
All right, I have a statement, but it's probably going to change based on everything we just heard. And I could probably change it over and over 100 million times because I already have today. My name is Rebecca Hauer. I've been a taxpayer here in Millcreek for 10 years. Many of you know my older son, Jackson, was a Trojan baseball player until he graduated last year. He now plays for Dartmouth College baseball. And now my younger son, Jake, is a ninth grader at MIHS, and he will be playing baseball for the Trojans this spring, along with many of the young men you see here today that have been standing here for hours. I would like to point out, based on that, I don't think we often see our football players in here. I don't think we've seen our basketball players in here begging you for somewhere to play. I have a son that played basketball on a state-of-the-art, beautiful basketball court that we have that I think the community has thoroughly enjoyed watching games on. And we've been very proud of it. And also our football field. I mean, I'm thrilled to have a son playing football now, Jake, who can play on that unbelievable field. People come from out of town and comment on how amazing it is. Then we have this embarrassing mess of a field that we can't play on for our baseball players. It's just not fair. It's just not right. And it's not a new topic. I've been coming to these meetings for 4 years now and listening to the same discussion. And I've always been too afraid. I'm not a great public speaker and I'm nervous to do it, but I felt that I owed it to all the people who are here the last 4 years talking to you, including my older son, the people here 4 years before that, 4 years before that, and 4 years before that, and probably going back even further than I know, talking about this same issue. We've spent more than $125,000 on studies. We have to continually change permits or resubmit permits, spend more money while this discussion continues and continues and continues. I was here when it was promised to us and then taken away. I know a lot of you are new on this board, and a lot of the people are new, these families and these boys are new to this too, and that will continue to change year to year. I really hope that this board will be the board to finally get it done. And in my opinion, we need to do it right. My sons are both outfielders. They can't play on grass in March. It's just going to be too wet. We live in Erie, Pennsylvania, and we need a turf field, a completely turf field. And we have for years. And I've been all over the country for baseball, and we see these beautiful fields in towns much smaller and school districts much smaller than ours. So I implore you to please get this done and get this done right. Don't do it on the cheap. Don't try to save money. We have a community here that I think will thoroughly enjoy coming to these games at a beautiful park with lighting and a safe field for our boys to play on. It's a total safety hazard right now. I know we have 3 or 2 games at least in March that we probably won't play. No way. So on behalf of these boys, the boys that have come before them and before them and before them and before them, and the ones that are going to come after them and after them and after them, it would just be, I think, really great if this board could be the board to finally get it done. And I believe you will, because you have all the information and you've heard everything that there is to be said and spent all the money to get all the research done. So I think that now's the time to give us something that our community could be proud of.
Thank you very much for the narrative and backstory. Are there any specific questions you have about the field, or for the young men in this room? Are there any questions that you want to ask us about the field or think that we need to be concerned about? Questioning.
questioning for the
So
committee.
questioning the study. But I appreciate the backstory because it is good. A lot of us are new to this board and
Yes, I know a lot of people are new, and if I could just add too, I think this is our new coach, and all of the people like me who've been here and heard all these things and know all the concerns. I think it would be nice to be involved in some of this discussion before decisions are made. Again, because we don't want to be coming back year after year after year to discuss it. Thank you.
Hello. My question is, I'm sorry, Rob Hauer. My question is, because we've gone through this before where we spent all that money to get that analysis of the current field. And there was huge concerns about the drainage. And I heard you speaking about them. And I want to hear more about that because I'm not convinced if we're going to sink $3 million to do it right, that can be fixed. And then what do we do after it's built and we're going to be dealing with and then with those residents, how do we know that that's going to work? My question.
thank you for that question.
Yes.
Our engineer, Mike Sanford in particular, has done a lot of stormwater management in Erie County and all over Pennsylvania. We have rules and regulations we have to meet. No matter what, we have to meet those regulations and make sure that it's a system that's going to operate efficiently and appropriately. Millcreek Township's not going to let us put in a system that would not work. It just wouldn't happen. It will be taken care of.
So to follow up on that, did Mr. Sanford do the first study? Because that gentleman's point, all we heard about the first study was how bad the water management was going to be in that site. But your study here specifically says that Walnut Creek and Hanlon, there's not that much of a difference between the water management and costs, roughly.
Well, it's infiltration. That's the difference. Is one's infiltration and how we have to handle it. The other one is the channel that we have to install at the bottom of the hill. But there is some infiltration at Hanlon, which helps us. And I'm pretty sure Mike, I don't think Mike did the drainage on the right. He did the design for us, but I don't think it was ever implemented on that site.
That's one thing that's not clear in here. How much exactly water
Stormwater management,
costs? Because I believe when they were in here, I thought they were almost exactly the same.
they vary site to site, but it's about $450,000 across each site. Now, mind you, that includes the drainage that we're doing for the field as well. So if you actually broke out the stormwater management, it's about $250,000. Because we have a lot of drainage that goes underneath those turf fields. And that helps account for our collection.
The comment about the studies. I could be wrong in my recollection because I was just joining the board as this first conversation placed. I was under the impression that the original water study for storm management was almost $700,000, which is why we pushed to say, is there not a better place? And now we kind of come back, but if we changed engineers, I mean, I understand that maybe they've a little different outcome, but I can't say that factually. It's just my recollection from as I just entered the board, so there was a lot going on.
Mike, I think it was closer to 500K. The whole cost was $1 million, and half of it, that's what I remember in my mind, half of it was for tanks underneath the ground.
That's exactly right, Mr. Dean. It was about a little over $1 million, like say 1.1, and $500,000 of that was going towards stormwater.
Thank you. Thank you both for clarifying.
My question, I guess, would be if they're saying that they can fix it and put it at the Hanlon field, wouldn't they have to continue working on it until it's fixed if they say they can do this?
Well, this would be part of the design with the new baseball field. So they would have to resolve all the stormwater management problems as part of the permit process.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of a given. It's like saving energy with the new code. I mean, it just comes natural with it. We will have to resolve those water issues no matter what.
But it wouldn't be on a flat rate. It would be a change order and could raise substantially to fix it. It's not like we're going to do it for 3 million, it's done. That would be a change order. And if it costs $5 more million to fix it, as Chris says, they'll fix it, but it's not a flat rate. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you would continue to pay to get it fixed.
Well, if there's a design and the design is approved by the township, the contractor performs that work to the design and it operates the way it's supposed to, there wouldn't be any more. It's done.
But if it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, then we spend more money to make it work.
No, you wouldn't have to because the contractor would be responsible with his bid in order to make it to what he bid on. See, the design that's done by Sanford or whoever the engineer might be is the same no matter what. And if a contractor bids on it and they said they're going to do that work, they'd be responsible for doing all that work. You wouldn't be responsible for fixing it or changing it because it's an already approved design.
And can we timestamp this today on our recording so that when it goes over by $500,000, then we're going to say, nope, it's covered?
Well,
Because change orders happen all the time. And when we had the roof go bad at the Asbury Elementary or something, well, you know, the flashing was wrong and this guy went out of business and this guy went bankrupt. So, you know, if it's a single bid and somebody holds a bond for it and it's paid for, God bless America. That's great. But in the real world, I don't believe it.
I think we're comparing apples and oranges. When you're talking about natural grade and design of infiltration for water, and then a roofing system that's an actual product, because we don't have an actual product that we're using for the stormwater retention. I mean, it's stone, grass, plants, things like that. So it's more of a matter of assembling those materials and making sure they work according to the design that Millcreek Township told us we needed to perform. As opposed to a design for a roof. Do you see what I'm getting at? That
Sure.
those has materials that are made by different manufacturers and necessarily don't have to meet a performance criteria of the township.
Unfortunately, the topography of Millcreek and all of Erie County is all downhill. And there's a multi-million-dollar across the street from Walnut Creek where somebody wouldn't let them run a ditch through their property, and that keeps getting argued and such. So stormwater is a very volatile.
Yes, it is.
thing. You know, and like I said, I'm not at all against it, but I mean, it's just an expensive date and then some.
It is. You are right about that.
But it's got to be right. If the drainage isn't right, then we're right back to where we started. You know, it absolutely has to be right. It has to be dry, it has to drain.
It does.
Mr. Lindner, I have a question. I don't know if it's for you or for Mr. O'Toole. It's about funding. It's not about the design of the field itself, but is this something that we're putting forth to roll into our bond, or would we be able to use any of the committed fund that is for extracurriculars towards any of this?
We were anticipating bond money, using bond money. It's part of the resolution. And we had allocated 4 million for this project.
There are no other questions from the public that I didn't look in Zoom. Are there any hands up in Zoom so I don't forget our online colleagues?
I see no hands raised in Zoom.
So how long would it take if we did that field, that family, did the whole turf, infield, outfield, okay, grade? What's the time of it? Is one season just be totally wiped out? You can't start till like April, May, I don't know. It's all about timing. If you wanted to actually have this field for next spring to perform on, we probably need that to bid right now. We need to get the materials and everything so that we'd have the fall to finish up. If you were to bid it this summer, I think you'd be looking at the following year.
So years past, we've had 10 games, all of our home games have been put there. This year we're in competition with the games there. They got the majority of their home games there. We're a little late to it. We have a couple of games.
Just 4 games.
Yes, challenged time schedule is going to impact playability for upcoming seasons. And if you,
Would that be an issue, you know, in terms of when you look at some developments around there, the residents? You'd be able to do that?
We would, you just have to make sure that right, that the light is aimed appropriately and the light levels are appropriate, that it's not too bright. We can't have too much light pollution. So each one of these takes those into consideration. Yes, we have to make sure that we run that past the township, and then more than likely, they're gonna probably want to have some type of meeting with everybody about it as well, I would imagine. Well, if we keep the lighting levels to the appropriate levels they're supposed to be, like much like at Gus Anderson, we'd be fine. Because you can appropriately light a field that you can have the light on the field and not just light up the sky. In particular with all this new LED lighting like by Musco, I mean, it's amazing what they can do with it. Yes. Musco Lighting does a lot of the sports lighting throughout Pennsylvania. They're very aware, like with baseball, you need much more light than we do for the football. This would actually be bid because it's state dollars. It would be bid, so it could be anybody. We've worked with several manufacturers. I know A-Turf, they're already in the school district. They're already maintaining some of your fields, so we just use that as a baseline.
So this project would be like any other project. It would have to go out to bid and we would go through the viable bidders. Appreciate those comments. We would expect the professional to make sure that that was part of the bid contract. I do ask if there are additional questions for the board or the professional that you would come up to the microphone and we ask those questions. We are not a third of the way through our meeting this evening. I do not want to cut this discussion short, but I also want to keep us on topic. So if there are
I have one
specific
question on
questions-
parking. You mentioned the concern at Walnut Creek about multiple events at the same facility, but what did you look at with Hanlon? Because there's tennis at Hanlon, the other field is being used for lacrosse, soccer, it's being used all the time. So what is the parking requirement that you use to say that it's adequate?
Well, at Hanlon, what we're fortunate there is we don't really have an occupant load. That there's not a time that it's always used 9 to 5. With the school, that's what BIU and the township would look at is, well, what if you were to have a game during the day from between 9 and 3? Well, then we have to accommodate for more parking for those 50 bleachers. On the Hanlon site, we wouldn't because there's no schedule. There's no set occupancy for that site. So that was one of the concerns for both the Learning Center and Walnut Creek is the additional parking required because they could come back and say, well, you need 50 more spots, which we did accommodate for because we figured worst case scenario, they are going to make us put more parking.
That being said, thank you for presenting the study. And
Thank you.
we said Aaron and Mr. Gallagher will bring that forward potentially at the end of the month here at the board meeting. I do want to circle us back to section 3, which are action items for this evening. As I said, we have 12 more to address this evening, and we will start with item 3.01. Mr. Toole, if you would like to take us through the financial report, and if you want to work through the ones that are specifically you, I'm free to let you go out of order, and I will take the ones that belong to me.
Yes, thank you. So 3.01 is the annual comprehensive financial report and the single audit report, which essentially this was our audit. However, what we've done in terms of trying to be more transparent and making it easier to read is we have moved our normal audit into and applied for the certification for an annual comprehensive report. Essentially what it does is it provides a lot more information, a lot of operating information. It allows you to be much more transparent in the numbers that you see there and how we're operating. From my understanding is we're the first district in northwestern Pennsylvania and one of the few in western Pennsylvania that have applied for the certification for an annual comprehensive financial report. So that's a big accomplishment as we're working through because it is a lot of data. If you can refer to page, the first page, and there's a letter that I wrote that kind of explains our financial position and the outcomes as well as what the driving factors are. If we move on to, I'm going to skip through just a couple pages in here just to kind of highlight a few items within the report itself. On page 10, there's a financial highlights section. that does give you some information in terms of how the district ended the year. Page 16 is a summary. This is the governmental activities. Essentially what it is the report is broken down into your MD&A, your management discussion and analysis, and then it goes into your financial reports, then the notes, then the operating statistics. The MD&A, the difference between the financial reports and the MD&A is primarily fixed assets and long-term debt. Your long-term debt, meaning accruing your interest in the pension and OPEB liabilities. And then your fixed assets is you're just recognizing depreciation. As compared to the financial reports at the fund level, it's more of it's a modified accrual, but it's more of the cash value that you have that you're paying for on an annual basis. If you do look through the first 16 pages, it outlines the differences between the MD&A reporting as well as the fund accounting, and then the notes help supplement that. But if on page 16, our net position for their government activities, which is the general fund, as well as the capital projects and capital reserve funds, improved by about 9 million. I will say about 2.8 million of that is just a reclassification from the governmental activities to business activities. Essentially what that was is we wanted to recognize what the true net pension liability as well as OPEB liability was for the food service and child development funds. Historically, they were all recognized in the governmental. Well, we recognize them moving forward into the respective funds, which is appropriate. As you can look on page 17, historically, when you would look at these items, the formatting is different here. We historically reported just local, state, federal revenue, instruction, support services, non-instructional, and debt as the line items. You can see here that we've broken it out by specific types of revenue as well as expenditures by department, which that theme will hold consistent throughout the entire report. If we move on to, I'm going to move to page 27. This is the fund level, as I was talking about, the difference between the government-wide and the fund level. Our funding end balance, or our fund balance, ending balance was at 20.2 million for the general fund, about 30 million for our capital reserve, which is the bond money, and about 7.6 million for capital projects. Additional details were all included in this report, but as well as the presentation that I had given in the fall about how we ended the year. Again, I just wanted to reillustrate on page 29 the detail that we provided as compared to what we had been providing historically. 31, as you can see, the non-current liabilities. This is your food service and child development funds. You can see that now we're recognizing OPEB and your pension liabilities. That will also be included in your deferred inflows and outflows, which is going to be a big difference for those funds. Truthfully, they'll never show a positive net, well, I shouldn't say never. It'll be a while before they show a positive net position, the same way our government activities because of the pension liability itself. I mean, our pension liability is about 148 million. It's no different than every school district across the state of Pennsylvania has a sizable pension liability because of how underfunded the program is. And then the last item that I wanted to bring everybody's attention to is if you just go to page 77, this is brand new to the report. From page 77 to page 108 are operating statistics, and it shows a trend. We will typically, within an annual comprehensive financial report, you'd like to show 10 years worth of data. When you're looking at trending, I had 8 years. I chose 8 years because that's when I felt it was the most reliable information, as starting about 8 years ago as we're moving forward. But we will continue to add years to it until we reach that 10-year mark. That is a high level of where we are. The numbers didn't change at all from what I presented back in the fall. on what the outcome was at the end of the year. But again, I just wanted to reiterate that we did try to provide much more detail in this report. You have history, you have much more greater detail into the department level, as well as our revenue, as we're trying to become much more transparent. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you for the transparency and the additional extra information. It is in the public side of board docs, so if you would like to read 108 pages of Aaron's sweat, blood, and tears, that's what he's been working on for a while now.
We will add additional information to you every year as we continue to move forward. This just was a lot of information to pull all in one year. We did submit, I think in closing, is we did submit the application to have the certification itself. It will take them 4 to 6 months till we'll hear back to understand whether or not it's been approved. Or
Thank you, Aaron, for bringing the recommendation to the board and having the board, let you go ahead with this CAFA report for additional transparency for the district.
Thank you. Moving on to, if there's no other further questions, I'm going to move on to 3.02, which is the Erie County Technical School budget. You can see we have a resolution here that their budget in total is about expenditures of about 6.966 million. For secondary program contributions of about 4.77 million. Yeah, our contribution is roughly 840,000. It was up about 20,000, if I recall correctly. There it is attached. So we would be asking to have this budget approved, which has already been approved by the VOTEC board.
It's not been approved by the vote. It's
Okay.
approved to be brought to the individual school boards, the distinct school boards of the Erie Technical School. They will then elect to pass or not pass it at the individual board meetings. They're asking us to do that by the end of this month so that they can then elect to accept the budget should it pass. Did I get that correct, Attorney Senate?
That's right. I had it backwards.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay.
And Mike, this is based on our participation rate.
Yes, this is based on our participation rate. We actually saw a $15,306 increase to our contribution. It's only a 1.84% increase. The technical school had an average increase of 3.18%. And that is due to our participation has declined over the last few years. But we, our 3-year average, we've seen a decline of about 7% over the last 3 years, and that's why we saw our individual contribution has not increased as much as others, where the other school districts are seeing growth. We are seeing, minimal use of. We're not seeing many students erode away from the program. I'm excited to see that there are a couple of highlights of the program. They're going to bring on a instructor for sports therapy and exercise science program. So they are starting to revamp some of their programs there that will be enticing to our students as well. So while we may have a declining enrollment or participation at the moment, I see that the technical school is changing their portfolio of courses. So I envision that we may see some more of our students return to the technical school in the future as some of those courses align with their career opportunities.
Would it be safe to say that some of those students are at our mill now, you think? Manufacturing
I
lab?
think our mill has changed some of our participation.
Dynamics. Yeah.
Because it is similar to a program that they have there.
Yes, that program is growing in now.
Correct.
Thanks. Okay.
Sorry to interject on your.
No, you're all
So we
right.
need to
Thanks.
move that forward then.
Any other discussion with 3.02? Okay, I'll move on to 3.03. It's we're asking a recommendation to approve the E-rate purchases that are attached. They are for additional switches, UPSs, and networking equipment at various Millcreek Township School District buildings. Essentially what this is every 5 years, the federal government has its approach of funding E-rate. It's E-rate funding, which allows you to, the federal government gives you money essentially. They'll pay 60% of your purchasing of networking equipment. Our new funding allotment for the next 5 years is 1.1 million, which means that we have to spend about $1.8 million in our capital funding equipment. I'll have more information to present on how we plan to spend those funds in March, but this is the first phase at various buildings of upgrading our network equipment. So 60% of that $253,000 that you see purchased will be funded by the federal government. Any questions?
This isn't our rate for data, like we use Velocity for the bulk or anything like that. This is just hardware here, right?
This is in addition to, because we still receive that and we take advantage of that in our budget. So it's about 60% there too.
Yes, this is just purely hardware.
Any other questions? Moving on to 3.04, this is an agreement for a software called Gaggle Net Incorporated, and it essentially, well, I'll let Mr. Mosley speak a little bit more on behalf of what this product provides.
Hi. So Gaggle is a student safety software. It ties into their students' accounts. It'll look for things on their documents, their emails related to self-harm, suicide, drug use, abuse, things of that nature. We looked at 5 products. We narrowed it down to 3. And then we had a committee look at those 3, and Gaggle was the one that they felt would best suit our students. We do have other products similar to this for just web searches, but that's only a piece of the information that students are putting out there. So I'm not very good at public speaking. But we did run a test over Christmas and in January, and the amount of information it picked up was pretty enlightening. One thing we like about this product is that it also has a human component that will look over the flagged items. So to kind of eliminate some of the potential for error. And then on the most serious ones, they'll actually make a phone call versus just sending an email to alert. But we really think of how much we're doing with the students online, that, you know, we're talking about their social and emotional wellness, that this is something that, you know, working with our counselors would definitely be a beneficial product for the district.
I have a couple questions for you, Mr. Mosley, and I know why it's coming through this committee because it is a contract and it is IT. But I question, has Instruction and Student Services supported this type of program, and what have they validated the need for it? Because it is both an IT and a student services component here.
They were involved in the committee when we were evaluating products. This initially came up on an ask from the core team based on a situation that occurred at one of our middle schools. That, you know, if this type of product could have helped prevented some of the issues that happened in that case. So they were definitely involved in that, as well as our counselors and core admin and building administrators as well.
Additionally, it certainly transcends just being an instructionally focused item. This is more about security. Of course, we've seen an increase across the country, and our district is not impervious to this, where we have a number of concerns around cyber threats. We've seen an increase in students being bullied via either cyber or some of our electronic platforms, some of our social media platforms. So in addition to that single incident that Mr. Mosley is alluding to, this is certainly a strategic approach to make sure that we have something in place that is preventative, as opposed to waiting until there are issues that occur with our students.
And there are a couple of districts around us that use this product as well. I did reach out to our TSG members, and some of them spoke highly of it.
Purely on the IT side. Does this work only on MTSD devices, or is it anytime a student accesses any web-based MTSD software platform? So
This is tied to their MTSD Microsoft accounts as well as their Google accounts. So they have to be logged in with their account. If they're doing a web search, they have to be logged in with their MTSD account for it to find it. But it will also search their Google Drive as well as their Microsoft OneDrive. So any documents that they have saved on the school district's account, it will monitor that.
and when
And
it
that could be
flags,
from any device.
so when it flags a student or it tracks the students, who owns the tracking information on a student and where does it reside? And how is it disposed of after a certain period of time? Because we're gonna scan all the students in the district to look for this, and we're gonna know what they search, what they're looking at, what their habits are. How do we protect those students from being targeted by advertisers, production, other products? How do we ensure that they're, the student that's going around doing like normal student things isn't at risk of,
So
how do we protect
Gaggle's
that?
very aware of that, and they hold this information security very highly, and they do not sell the students' information. I can look deeper into that and get more information on that from our rep for you.
And if I could add to that, they have, as part of the contract, if you saw it, 2 attachments, both the privacy attachment and the student privacy attachment. There's a Gaggle student staff data privacy notice that is attached. And in addition to that is the Gaggle privacy policy, which is also attached. Acknowledging their responsibilities and identifying how they'll take care of the records, both in the disposal, complying with FERPA, complying with COPA. COPA doesn't really apply because they're not logging into their separate website, so COPA really doesn't apply. But they acknowledge COPA as part of their privacy and acknowledge their responsibilities. And, back in August of 2021, you raised the issue about student privacy, and so we did at that time create a third-party checklist, which we review each contract with. And we did review this contract with that checklist, make sure all the items that are on our checklist are in the contract, and they are. So
I commend you for that and making sure that our students' privacy is of the utmost importance.
And I guess my question would just be on the being transparent with our students to make sure that they are aware. I mean, obviously they know that when they're using our devices, that their data
Hey, who knows how many students are in this school district?
being analyzed and that they understand that. And I don't know how the best way to go about that is, but I think we do need to be transparent with our students.
I know in our acceptable use policy, there is no expectation of privacy for our students when it comes to their district accounts.
So it's part of the notices that we send out on a yearly basis. It's part of the policy, which is on the website. And I think they even sign off on it as part of the yearly sign off.
Any other questions?
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Mosley? Mr. O'Toole, you want to, while moving us through?
Yeah, one point I wanted to make, last point on that, is this is not budgeted for this year. This will require a budget amendment. So moving forward, 3.05 is this is the annual CoStar salt contract that we have. It's for the purchase of the salt when we plow. There's ice. You could see in there the details associated with that. Any questions in regards to this line item?
I see it says we're required to purchase 60%, basically is like the minimum. If we request 100 tons, we got to buy 60. Is that?
That's not going to be a problem at all. I mean, we store a lot anyhow. So even if we had to purchase it, just hypothetically, it was a very warm winter, we would be able to have it in storage. So that won't be an issue.
And we kind of keep, that's what my next question was going to be. We keep track if it is a winter, like until January, we had virtually no snow or anything. If we have extra, we take that into account when we buy it for the next year.
Yes, we do.
But we have plenty of room to store it.
Correct.
And then we have the right to sell it if we wanted to. If there's a shortage or whatever, and we got extra, we can,
I don't know the answer to that question, but
I'm just kind of curious, because sometimes there's all of a sudden there's a big need for it or something. So
You could probably enter into
Premium
a
being
cooperative
had at the end of
agreement
the year.
with the township. Intergovernmental agreement.
it's certainly something you need in Erie, Pennsylvania, salt.
I don't think we could sell it to the consumer out there, but we might enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the other municipalities.
And this is like a Pennsylvania co-stars. It's not the Council of Governments that they have. It's like the regular government that the municipalities use.
this is the CoStars.
Right, which is a state program, but I know that like the county has a council, a COG, that they get their stuff from.
Yeah, this is different.
And
For
it's
which
what we-
most times they piggyback off one another. So I would have to look into the details, whether or not it's the exact same.
It's something we've used forever and it works.
Yeah.
Good enough. Thank you.
Any other questions? 3.06 is the Millcreek Township fees for the 2022, 2023 school year. These fees did not change from this current year. Any questions? Here none. 3.07 is the updated student activity account officers for this current fiscal year. And that's updates for Mcdowell High School. Any questions?
What's the smoking fee? $150.
Yeah.
That allows somebody to smoke?
Doesn't,
No, they're caught smoking.
Oh,
That's the fee
fine.
for being caught. That's the
Okay, I
fine.
was wondering if.
No, no, not you pay
After,
150,
like,
you get
I'm
to smoke.
good, so, okay.
That's per
All right.
occurrence.
I figured, hey, you got 100, Christ, you pay $10 a pack for a pack of cigarettes, so maybe like, here's 150, I'll smoke. Okay, my bad. Thank you.
All of our properties are tobacco free.
3. I'm sorry.
And we discourage our
3.07, is there
students
any
from
questions?
smoking.
Here none. I'll move on to 3.08. This is the security grant that we talked about receiving that was in the paper not too long ago. It's $500,000. It does require us to spend, in total, we'll be spending about $680,000 and we'll get 500 grand reimbursed. This motion is just to formally accept that grant. Any questions?
A couple of the things, I know you wrote the grant. And there's a lot of questions, what's not being too.
So I have to really give a lot of credit to Mike Gallagher, who kind of led us into the direction of the grant. And then Tom Sambucino did a lot of work in order to get this grant as well, our SSO. We identified, based off of the list of items that we've already had established, the direction we wanted to go to improve our security within our buildings. We had taken a few items off of that to identify to pay with the grant. It is going to be more structural. It does not relate to labor. With that said, if we want to talk further details, we could talk in executive session, as it's not appropriate to
I
talk
think
about our
we're one
security.
of only 2 or 3 in the Western PA to get this grant, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, so congratulations to the team there.
thank you. Any other questions? Moving on to 3.09 is the Manufacturing PA Training to Career Grant Award. You guys will, if everybody recalls, we actually received $200,000, just under $200,000 about 18 months ago, 2 years ago for this. Well, this grant here is again, Kyle Buckholtz, as well as Bob Zerda at the NWIRC teaming up and writing another additional grant while we received additional funding here, as you can see, of just under $100,000. Any questions? So they're doing a lot of great work down there in the manufacturing lab, and this will help continue to progress forward. 3.10 is a California Casualty Music Arts Grant. One of our teachers had written this, and it is for a grand total of $250.
Just a general comment about the 3.10, 3.09, 3.08. First, I want to thank our teacher, Ms. Jessica Alesso, for taking the time to write that grant. I also want to recognize your team and Kyle Buckles and members for going above and beyond, going outside and writing these grants and securing these funds for our district. I mean, we're right now talking about over $600,000 that people took the time to step up and do grants. There are grants out there. I just want to acknowledge the hard work that was put in on behalf of the district.
Thank you. Any other questions? 3.11 is a donation from Amazon. I'm not sure. My assistant had received a phone call or got it from Amazon. They donated a number of couple different fire tablets as well as some supplies. Again, I thought we could make some use out of it, so we accepted the donation, and this is to formally accept the. We already did 3.12, didn't we?
We did, yes.
Yes.
Okay, 3.13, accounts payable report. Any questions with 3.13?
The only question I have for you, Aaron, there is a significant amount of overtime with the custodials. I'm assuming that is all related to snow removal and the 50+ inches of snow we received in the last 4 weeks.
Yes, snow removal, salting. When you're looking at the custodial as well as the maintenance, the staff, I mean, that's all it is. Custodial is a little combination. If we're short-staffed, some might be working overtime in terms of helping assist in, the shift before them or the shift after. But a lot of it does relate to snow removal, yes.
When we approve the accounts payable, then does that come up again at the end of the month? Or
It
is
does.
It does or does not?
Correct. We are just moving it forward to the end of the month for the entire board to approve.
Okay.
So there will
And-
be additional accounts information in there and additional payrolls that'll take in place in between now and then.
And I didn't know if it was possible for me to change my vote, probably not, from last month's accounts payable. I don't have a problem with the payroll or with the, but the accounts payable from Attorney Senate might be able to clarify that. Once I voted on it, it's done basically from January or no?
You would have to, at the board meeting or at the CAL, make a motion for reconsideration of the accounts payable and then ask the board to revote. Would be the only way you can do it.
To register my vote.
You can't change your vote just by announcing a change in vote.
Understand.
Once you
Okay.
voted, you voted. We'd have
Okay.
to redo the whole thing,
Yep.
which I assume we've already paid those.
Right.
Yes.
So a reconsideration is probably not in place because we've taken action based on the prior vote by the board.
Mr. Kadoka, when I bring this forward, would you like me to separate accounts payable from payroll? this
Could you
month?
please, for tonight, yes, because I'm going to vote just no on that.
So you don't want it to bring it forward?
He would like me to I asked him if he'd like us to separate accounts payable and payroll. So we'll do it in 2 votes, one for accounts payable and one for payroll, as opposed to both together as I've historically done.
Like if there's an issue with it, should I, because it does seem like once it's approved, it's approved. Should I separate it out now or should I vote against it at the end of the month?
Well, I think the vote for tonight is just for the committee to bring it forward to the board. And if you want to vote no in regard to a certain accounts payable item, that's more appropriate at the board meeting itself as opposed to bringing it, unless you want further discussion and debate about a certain item that you want the committee to address. Then you could.
Yeah, if we could do that when we get to that point or whatever, if that
Okay.
that would appreciate that. Thank you.
So we're at that point. So we're taking discussion on 3.13. So accounts payable. If you glad to answer your question. What's the
Okay,
concern?
my issue is paying Attorney Weichler that is involved in a separate suit that involves myself and Lou Aliota. And I was advised by my counsel that I shouldn't vote for that. I don't know if it's a conflict or what it is, but I just want it on the record that I don't approve of that.
I mean, you can abstain or vote no, whichever your council has given you advice.
And I can do that at the end of the month.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. That's when I'll do that. That's all. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point on any of the 12 action items? If not, I would like to bring forward items 3.01, 3.02, 3.03, 3.04, 3.05, 3.06, 3.07, 3.08, 3.09, 3.10, 3.11, and 3.13 as a motion to bring to the board meeting at the end of the month on the 28th. And I have a second.
I'll second it.
One last call for discussion, formality. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're on to informational items, 4.01, and I can take the first one. As the representative for the board at the JOC for the Erie County Technical School, just wanted to share with you all, and it's in the public section also for this, the phasing of how the tech school is going to be renovated over the summers for this summer 22 through to summer 23. There's also a list of how the temporary moves are taking place in that building so that they can accommodate all of the programs. One of the great things that they've been able to do is to make sure that all the programs are still functional in the building. The reason that the phasing has changed slightly is because they're having supply chain issues related to the commercial kitchen equipment. So they needed to pause the renovation of the kitchen for the culinary arts program until they could get the new equipment. They also had some challenges with the structural steel for the new addition, but they were able to work with all the contractors. At this point, there is no change order for the change of phasing, which is a big win for all of the districts in the tech school. If anyone has any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer them. Mr. Atul, I will turn 4.02 over to you.
All right, good evening. So tonight I was planning to present a PowerPoint regarding our budget that's broken down into several different sections. A little bit of, I pulled some information from PSBA and what they put out last year. To let everybody have a general understanding of how our funding works, how we compare, going to a forecast where I anticipate us to end this year, as well as the first draft of our budget for next year. So it is a little lengthy, so please bear with me as I will try to go through this as quickly but as efficiently as possible. Again, I like to start off every budget presentation with our mission statement. The Millcreek Township School District provides a world-class education that prepares students to reach their potential as lifelong learners and responsible citizens. Our budget should have that in mind in every line item, as well as with the vision statement. We look through here. This is, again, as I mentioned, a PASBA or a PSBA report that was put out in 2020. But I think this report's very, very important in certain segments in this. So what this slide represents is the top 3 budget pressures are mandated costs for districts. This isn't just Millcreek. These are districts across the state of Pennsylvania, with the first being your cyber enrollment, special ed costs, and pension costs. All 3 of those are mandated. We don't control those increases year over year. As we move on to a little bit of most public schools are relying on local resources. As you can see at the bottom right here, it shows an amount of source of revenue. So for suburban districts, you're looking at about $10.7 billion is generated in local revenue versus 4.5 million. Looking on the left-hand side where it says revenue sources as a percentage, this is really telling. You know, all school districts, about just under 60%, 58.5% is locally generated compared to 38.5 state generated revenue. Your rural areas is just about 50 compared to 48%, but your suburban is about 70% locally funded versus 29% state funded. We're no different. As you'll see, as we're working through these slides, we're a suburban district and we align to those metrics, much like most districts across the state. This slide here shows our revenue shares vary widely across the state of Pennsylvania. So as you're looking, this is every school district in the state of Pennsylvania as of 2020. The darker the purple means the more reliant you are on local revenue. The darker the orange, the more reliant you are on state funding. You look in there, there's only 2 purple districts in Erie County, Millcreek and Fairview. Pennsylvania schools are among the lowest in the state in share of education funding, or not in the state, in the country, I apologize. If you look on the left-hand side, it talks about your percentage of revenue from state sources. Pennsylvania ranks 44 at about 39% generated from the state. If the state's not covering the cost to provide instruction, you're forced to look at your local resources. Property taxes continue to be a primary revenue source. As we had talked about beforehand, within the suburban areas specifically, you rely on your local resources highly, almost to the point of just under 70%. As you look here, this is slides more defined in terms of property taxes itself. In the suburban areas is about just under 58%. That's the state average. Moving on to pensions push the state spending higher nationally. You can look, our state spending is number 9 in the entire country in terms of expenditure per student. However, when you look at that, the pension costs are about 32% of that 15,000. Over $5,000 of our education our cost per student is allocated to pension costs. This slide shows a trend from, we look at the bottom left-hand side, a trend from 2008, 2009 up to 2018 school year. The red represents pension costs and the increases over that time. The dark purple is the charter school tuition rate, and the lighter purple represents our special education costs. As you can see, over the last 10 years, as of 2018, over 600% increase in pension costs. Over just under 200% increase in charter school tuition. And just under 66% increase in special education costs. And I remind everybody, these are mandated costs. We don't control them, they're state mandated. These costs are growing faster than what our Act 1 index can actually cover. So if we look at the ECR, which is your contribution rate in terms of the pension overall, which is what this graph represents, is you could see as of the 2020-21 school year, for every dollar of salary spent, 34.5% is allocated to the pension system. This slide shows the state and federal shares of special education costs decreasing. So if you look at that bottom line is that bottom line represents the remaining share that needs to be covered, which is the difference between the state share, the middle line, and the federal share at the top. Long story, over time, the local share, you're going to have to pick up more because there's a decrease in the contribution from the federal and state government to help to fund our state funding, our special education funding, excuse me. So as I rephrase that, is the state and federal funding is decreasing year over year, which means have to rely more on your local resources to cover the cost of special education. This slide focuses strictly on mandated increases to charter tuition. You could see again from the 2008, 2009, all the way to 17, 18, the increases. The increase in the tuition paid was just under 200% alone. The enrollment was about 100%, just over 100%. Again, those growth rates over that 10-year period is exponential. And the state isn't providing any additional funding to help cover those increasing costs over all 3 of those state mandated costs. So I'm going to go into showing a little bit more comparison of Millcreek. That was at a state level, which we're no different. We have those 3 state mandated costs, but let's look a little bit more about how Millcreek's revenue as well as expenditures compare. So this slide shows Millcreek's 2021 actual results versus the actual results of the state average and local average for 1920. If you look at the local revenue, Millcreek's just under 70 million that was generated as of the last fiscal year, which is about 65% of our total revenue. The state average is about 56%. The local average is about 37%. So what I'm trying to articulate within this slide here is we rely heavily on our local resources. Why? Because we receive less state funding. If you look at the local averages over here, is 56% of the local average is state funding. If we don't receive state funding, we're going to have to make up that difference, and I'll go into some more details here shortly. So this slide is just showing what the comparable districts are that I used. For the next couple of slides, you'll see that I have an IU average, as well as a common district average, state average, and where we are at Millcreek. So this is our total revenue, or local revenue per student. The red represents Millcreek. The gray represents the IU, black represents common districts as are represented by within a 41 to 47% free and reduced rate, and enrollment above 35,000 or 3,500 and under 11,500. So where does Millcreek rank in terms of total revenue per student? And this is from 2011 to 2020. Red. We're just below the state average. Well, we're well below the average of common districts that are common to us, and well above the IU average. In 2020, we ranked 201 out of 500 districts in terms of local revenue per student. And you can see this trend has been consistent year over year. For us to understand our local revenue a little bit further here is we have to understand an equalized mill. And essentially what an equalized mill is what's the tax burden that you're placing on your district and trying to equalize that to be able to compare taxes across every school district across the state. So if we look at our equalized mill for a comparable districts, you're looking at Millcreek's tax burden. The lower the equalized mill, it generally refers to the less tax burden that you have on your taxpayers. The higher the equalized mill, the more tax burden. When you're looking at districts that are funded most comparable to us, well, we have the lowest tax burden looking out of that subgroup. Which is important because it does drive a little bit more in state revenue, which I'll be talking about here specifically. If you look at that equalized mill for all those in IU5, we're less than average. We're right in the middle of the pack. However, if you recall, 37% average is locally funded. They receive about over 50% of the local average receives 50% of their funding from the state, whereas we're about 36%. But meanwhile, our tax rate's lower than average. We want to look at what our tax rate is just overall. You can see it, take a look here, we're blue. I tried to highlight that to make it easy to identify. Again, our tax rate's middle of the road when you're looking within the IU5. And the IU5, I should have clarified this, I apologize, is mostly Erie County, a few other districts a little bit south. So understanding our tax rate a little bit further here is the benchmark analysis that I show here. This was a slide that was presented by BDO years ago, and I just continue to use it year over year because it shows the effect of compounding. You know, in 2009, if you look at the top section here, the Millcreek Township School District and then the average tax rate increase are the two areas that I'm focusing on right now. 2009, Millcreek didn't increase taxes. 2010-11, 5.32% increase. In 2011, 2012, didn't increase taxes. And then you can see the average increase in Erie County down below. Well, what's that translate when you're looking at additional revenue? So in 2009, 2011, because Millcreek didn't raise taxes, they lost out on about just under 1.8 million. In 2010, 11, did raise taxes, which generated about 1.2 million. And then in 11, 12, didn't raise taxes, which lost out on about 1.2 million. If you add all three of those up, it's 1.8. However, that's not the only money that was lost. Because their tax rate adds on every year, there's a compounding effect to that. And that's essentially what we're showing down at the bottom side section of this. Is the first year was out, Millcreek didn't generate 1.8 million. The second year, it's 740 that was lost out. And then in the third year, it was just over 2 million for a grand total of about 4.5 million. So not raising taxes 1 year impacts future revenue every year as we continue to move forward. As we're talking about tax rates, it's not good just to raise taxes. You need to really understand your economy as well. And so what I tried to do is I used two marks here that are for way of determining inflation. I use CPI as well as the cost of living adjustment for Social Security. And I tried to take it back from 2006 to this current past year on what the growth has been year over year. Essentially, are we keeping up with inflation? Are we not keeping up with inflation? Is it what we're trying to measure out of this? As you can see here, red is Millcreek, CPI is the green line item, and gray is the COLA line item. And I just took that over since 2006, added them up, what's been the growth? If you look from about 2014, 15, we've been mirroring pretty much the increases in terms of growth of inflation. Prior to that time, we weren't, which in turn means lost revenue at the end of the day, as well as the economy was growing, but we weren't taking advantage of that. The last year or two, you can see that gap starting to widen. But if we look from 2006, MTSD is about 6.14% behind CPI and about 10.44% behind COLA in terms of growth, our tax rate versus those inflationary factors. And that's about a lost revenue of about $5.9 million specifically for this fiscal year. Understanding the driving factors behind our state funding is they have a lot of different metrics that they use. And one of those is your market value personal income aid ratio. Essentially what they do is take whatever the value of the homes within the school district, the income, your personal income, which they take off of the state taxes, and weight that across the state average. The lower the market value personal income aid ratio is, the more wealthier the district's perceived to be. So if we take a look here at what our market value personal income aid ratio has been, you can see red, common districts are black, the line in the middle, the IU5 at the top. So this ratio really helps explain why other districts in the IU5 are receiving more state funding. They're needed. Additionally, they don't have the ability to raise it locally. And that's the entire premise behind the state's state's funding model, is if you have the ability to generate it locally, you should. If you don't, they're going to provide additional state funding to help offset that. But you can see how much below our market value personal income aid ratio is compared to other districts that are comparable to us, for which those districts were also generating more local revenue per student than what we were. So let's take a look at how that ratio is applied to an actual state funding formula. I just want to focus on the bottom level here, where you're looking at your district total, your equalized millage multiplier. We already discussed our equalized millage multiplier. We showed that those districts that were common to us, ours was rather low or middle of the pack when it comes to the IU5 average. And your times your market value personal income aid ratio would give you your district proration. These are some of the funding formula you have. Our market value personal income aid ratio was rather low, as was our equalized millage. Therefore, we're going to receive less state funding. So let's take a look. Our total state revenue per student. You can see that Millcreek's well below everybody. We actually ranked 415 out of 500 school districts in 2020. We look at our federal revenue per student, we ranked at 242 out of 500 in 2020. We look at our total current revenue, that's if we didn't issue any debt and have any large fixed asset sales, is what current revenue is you can see that we're well below the average of both our common peers, as well as the IU, as well as the state average. Our total revenue in 2020 ranked 450 out of 500 school districts. Only 50 school districts generated less revenue per student than we did. So let's take a look at the other side of this, which is our expenditures. And it's the same concept for the graph that you see coming here. And this is our instructional cost. We ranked 463 out of 500. We're well below our common peers as well as the IU5 average. If you look at our support services, we rank 304 out of 500. We're about in line with our common districts. Our non-instructional services, which is really our extracurriculars essentially, you can see we rank 403 out of 403 out of 500 districts. If I'm moving too fast, please tell me to slow down, but I know I'm trying to move. Total current expenditures, which is basically all of our expenditures with exception of debt. We ranked 430 out of 500 school districts. And then when you add in debt, our total expenditures per student ranks 456 out of 500. We're not generating revenue. We can't spend it on our students, which means we rank 456 out of 500. So let's talk. I know a lot of folks that ask about our fund balance, and I think it's appropriate to take a look at our fund balance and where we compare in terms of others. So that blue block that you see up here, this is our fund balance for the general fund balance as a percentage of your expenditures. That's what represents the dot, those black dots everywhere. Millcreek is where that blue block is. I tried to make it. When you're looking at IU5, our fund balance is rather low in terms of percentage of our expenditures compared to those within IU5. You want to look at our districts, our common peers that are funded most like us. We're about middle of the road. I am comfortable with our fund balance and where it is because we do control a lot of our own outcome. As we rely heavily on our local resources, that means we can generate additional revenue if we need to. Therefore, you don't need as much in savings. This slide is, I've used this slide in a lot of different presentations, but this is just to say, we don't just not look at revenue. We've been aggressive in how can we raise additional revenue. I mean, we've brokered deals with Lecom and Wegmans. We've continued to challenge us property assessments to the tune that over the last 7 years, about 124 million was increase in property assessments, which last year generated about $1.8 million. We've sold our buildings that we weren't using. The Nature Center for 1.5 million, Bernardale for 900,000. We've developed investment strategies to try to earn as much as we can, although the market's not very good at this moment in time. I do hope the Federal Reserve increases their rates a few different times this year. We've moved our discount rate forward. We've looked at our state funding, the reimbursement. I showed you one formula that was in there, but what measures can we do to increase our state funding? One example is we've improved our special education reimbursement by $100,000 annually. Our federal money about $250,000 annually. So we're not just sitting still and just waiting for additional appropriation. We're actually looking at what we can do to generate additional revenue. On the other side of that is we've got to control our expenditures. 2013, it closed 2 buildings. We've looked at programs that were underutilized. It didn't make sense from a fiscal standpoint to maintain those programs, such as Alternative Education North Coast or the Montessori program. We've eliminated positions. We've continued to negotiate rates whether that's with our workers' comp or our property liability or any of these contracts, we're consistently trying to negotiate a better rate. As I just mentioned, we've been adjusting staffing with enrollment. We know enrollment's been declining over the last 10 years. That's not new to Millcreek. Erie County's enrollment's declining. The state of Pennsylvania's enrollment's declining. So this slide here represents the orange line represents the decline in enrollment for Millcreek since 2012 or 13 to this past year. The blue line represents the cumulative change and adjustment in our staffing. So we have adjusted staffing according to our enrollment decline. We look at our enrollment projections moving forward. This is where we've been historically. Those bars represent the total enrollment for a year. At the bottom, it's 2011 to 2020, I believe. And then the blue line represents the free and reduced percentage over those time. And that's the purple line, I apologize. And then the blue line represents your special education enrollment over that time. You can see our free and reduced percentage has gone up. It's starting to dip down. Our special education enrollment is about peaked, about 18%. Our overall enrollment's declined. But as I mentioned, that's the case for Erie County as well as the state. We look at it that by grade level for where our enrollment was last year. It goes from pre-K to 12 at the bottom. In sixth grade, we do typically always see a jump in our enrollment. A lot of non-pub school children come and go to the public sector. I do expect kindergarten to bounce back. We are experiencing, looking at our real estate transfer data as well as our earned income tax data, a lot of younger families are moving into Millcreek. So I do expect us to buck the trend, for lack of a better expression here, in terms of our enrollment to increase. I don't expect that to be substantial or material at all, but I don't expect to see that decline that we've been experiencing. So that takes us, I wanted to explain how our money is generated and then how we compare in terms of spending. Now we're moving into where we expect to end this year. So starting off with local revenue, if we look at our real estate taxes, we expect to have a positive variance of about $340,000. This slide shows our local revenue down the left-hand side, where we ended this past fiscal year, our budget, and the forecast, and a variance and a percent change. So I do expect that we'll end the year about the local real estate taxes have a positive variance of about 337. I'm not entirely certain why. Since COVID hit, we've actually collected better on our property taxes than we have historically. I can't explain that trend, but if we are collecting more in our real estate taxes, that means our delinquent, which you can see down third from the bottom, is going to be less because there's less to collect in delinquent. So those two really need to be offset. Our earned income tax, our EIT, is $140,000 positive. We've really, LST, EIT, we've rebounded to pre-COVID levels. Our real estate transfer tax, as I mentioned, the rather large growth and high demand for properties has driven that line item to be a surplus of $410,000. As we talked about our interest rates, they haven't been where we expected them to be. However, we hope the Federal Reserve will adjust rates multiple times this year, which would change that outcome. That gives us a positive variance of about $549,000 for this current fiscal year. We look at our state. I'm going to focus on the basic ed funding formula as well as the special ed school age. The state in their budget this year did have additional appropriation, which gave us additional $376,000 for basic ed funding, as well as $97,000 for our special ed funding. Our basic ed Social Security, as well as the bottom line item, our state share for retirement contribution, I will show that we're expecting to spend less than expected for salaries. Those are all a percentage of salaries. So if you don't spend as much in salaries, you're not going to have as much reimbursement back. but overall, a positive variance of 446,000. Our federal money, it's rather level with the exception of how we're planning to use our ESSER money, the stimulus money. We are used more than what we anticipated in the budget. We're expecting to use about 1.34 million more. So that's about $1.3 million positive surplus. We look at that over the time, 2020, 2021 budget, our forecast, you can see where we're trending over time. And again, just under 64% of our total revenue is locally generated. Looking at the other side, looking at our salaries. So our administration salaries, we're actually expecting a positive balance of just under $40,000. We had some positions move over the course of this for retirements or movement into new positions, and those transitions and the timing to replace those positions is generating that savings. The teachers has about just under $1.9 million savings, that line item. That's a primarily result of 26 open positions. If you go and look at LOAs, that's going to need to be offset with the teachers because we have a negative variance of about 1.5 million because we have 40 LOAs. And then some of
Do you have a chart that would show our salaries compared to the 500 districts in Pennsylvania? You know, like, are we in the top 100? Are we in the top 200? Are we middle of the pack?
I could provide that the next presentation.
Still coming up.
Not here tonight. I didn't include that, but
Oh, okay.
I'm going to have to give an updated budget report anyway, and I could provide that.
Please. Thank you.
Secretary classified had a positive variance of 130,000. That's because of we haven't rehired a couple of positions. That's offset by the expected hiring of these positions. And then not to mention I had two positions budgeted in this line item, but one of them is being paid out of the technical support line item, and the other one we still haven't hired. So there's going to be a savings all year long if we haven't hired the position. You can see the overtime over. If I move down into the custodial SSO, it's a negative or a positive variance there as well. Well, it's the timing of filling our custodial open positions. We've had a lot of turnover, especially when you go down to the educational assistant. There's $136,000 savings. The timing of these positions that have been open, those taking unpaid days, we still have 8 positions that were open. So with the massive amount of turnover that we've had, which is unusual, then compared to past, there's going to be a savings because those positions aren't filled. That generated about a $467,000 savings. Benefits, clearly your FICA and PSERS, if you have less that you're paying in salaries, they're a percentage of salaries. Therefore, you're going to have a savings for those 2 line items. This is all offset by healthcare. Over the last couple of years, we've been trending flat. Although the national average is anywhere between 6 and 8% increases over year, we've been trending flat. Well, that's no longer the case. We're trending at about a 3.5% increase. Therefore, you see the negative variance here of 284,000. As we look into all of our other expenditures, our total contracted service, we are expecting to overspend at $1.7 million. That's primarily because we've tripled our substitute rate. That comes at a cost in doing so, as well as we added a mental health contract that was going to be used ESSER funding for, but that's the cost that we're projecting out. Our property services is going to be a little over a $500,000 negative variance. We've had to use coach buses because we don't have enough drivers for extracurricular activities. That as well as a future IT lease that we're planning. Looking at moving on to transportation field trip, we're running less routes than we historically have been. We budgeted for 92 routes. We're only running 75 routes per day. That comes at a savings of $173,000. Tuition is about $2.9 million negative variance. That's a little misleading because $2.2 million of that $2.9 million is a result of a VOTEC construction project. That was all based on timing. we have the money in our fund balance to offset that, so that will require a budget amendment. However, we did in our budget, if we recall from last year, we budget aggressively in this line item for about $600,000 aggressive, thinking that we would recruit students back from charter schools. That has not been the case. So that is going to be the outcome of this line item. We look at our supplies and utilities. A lot of that's a negative variance, but a lot of that's ESSER funded. So it was already accounting in the positive variance on the other side of it. Same thing for the equipment as we're moving down. But overall, we're looking at about $5.6 million deficit. What's that look like over time? You can see that here. Salaries and benefits is about 70% of our total budget. That's expected. We're in the people business. Most of our funding should be going to our folks. So what's that look like? This waterfall graph shows the revenue as we're building up, and then how we spent, working our way back down. We're about $3.2 million deficit. However, as I mentioned, $2.2 million of that is expected out of the VOTEC construction project. So we're operating at about $1 million deficit this current fiscal year. What are some of the options that we can do to eliminate that deficit? Well, we can look at our ESSER funding and kind of redistribute that based on what we expected. Therefore, we can use some of those funds to offset with the increase in the subrate. We could delay our IT lease. However, that's only going to make our equipment older. We can reduce the volume of PD. Those are a few of the options that we have available to us to reduce that. Otherwise, that is coming out of our fund balance. So as we move on to the budget, these slides are going to be pretty much the exact same. I just updated it. So rather than using the forecast, so your 2021 actual and then your 21-22 budget, I did 22-23 expected budget. And then I show the variance by comparing the budgets. As you can see, there's a positive variance in the budget expected for next year of 396. That's because I increased the collection rate by 5%. That's been the trend the last 2 years. Again, that's going to be offset down below with your delinquent taxes by 200,000. I was more aggressive in the LST and earned income tax for about $274,000 together, because we are trending at pre-COVID rates and actually a little higher for earned income. So in total for our local revenue, I added about $713,000 to our local revenue for next year's budget. That does not include a tax increase. We look at our state funding. I took advantage of the additional appropriation as we discussed for our basic ed, as well as our special ed subsidies. There's a few other as Social Security as well as our retirement. So Social Security is the second line item there of $64,000. Retirement's the bottom line of $390,000. As salaries increase, as do you get receiving half of that in subsidy. And then our rental reimbursement was reduced by $429,000. That's based on our debt payments. So there's an increase of $613,000. Our federal funding,